Hello and welcome back to Ventura County Works. This is Doug Foresta, and we have another very exciting episode for you today. Joining us is Sean Bardwatch. He is Managing Director at Breakthrough Growth Partners. He works with businesses across the region on digital transformation and growth strategies. And we're going to be talking about AI today. And of course, Rebecca Evans is here as well. Rebecca, Sean, welcome.
Thank you, Doug. Glad to be here.
Thanks so much, Doug. And yes, thank you, Sean. It was great. You and I have met and talked in meetings and talked about, all things workforce development before, and your contributions here in the local community in Ventura County. So first off, I wanted to just give you a moment to say a little bit about your organization. And then today we're going to launch into talking about AI, which is an area you work in. And you and I were recently at the Future of the Region event put on by the Ventura County Civic Alliance. And the topic was AI, artificial intelligence, and how we are using it, how we're adapting to it. And that session was a little bit of myth busting, and sorting out the hype related to AI in terms and comparing that with what's actually happening. So we're here today to talk about that and get a little bit more into detail of what organizations can do to utilize it, what they don't need to be afraid of, and what they do need to be concerned about, but just kind of putting it in perspective from your expertise and your knowledge base. So first, can you tell us a little bit about your organization?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Happy to do that. And I'll frame it in this way: is you and I go way back, but really when we think about the Workforce Development Board, and beyond that, when we think about economic development or policy in general, there's a lot of parallels to the world of innovation and technology-led innovation in business, right? We're really trying to create structures and craft the future and use the tools at our disposal to build an environment that's equitable and inclusive, and allows for competition and new ideas and new products and new ways of doing things to emerge that uplifts everyone. So it's with that background, my organization is Breakthrough Growth Partners, and we focus on helping organizations with AI strategy, and as a fractional AI officer service to make sure that they can succeed in this new world, navigating this new technology and figuring out the best way to evolve their organizations to take advantage of it.
Perfect. So we have our own AI expertise and organization right here in the region, right here in Ventura County and the greater region to help us navigate this. So really appreciate having the connection with you. So based on what you've seen so far and your experience working with businesses and organizations, let's talk about what some of the misconceptions are first. And I know you have three main misconceptions that you've observed. You want to talk a little bit about those?
Yes, I'd be happy to. And I think what's been interesting, right, overall, is if we paint the picture of the landscape, machine learning, data science, and AI is not a new technology. We've had it for many, many years. Many organizations have been using it in a lot of different ways. But what really captured the public's imagination is ChatGPT, right? And this explosion of a technology, an AI that's free, that looks like it's like a human, like a person talking to you, engaging. I think that's been amazing because really, when you look at technology and adoption, as from an engineering standpoint or an IT standpoint, you can get very excited about the potential of what technology can do. But the real power of technology is when it gets into the hands of people, right? That's where you see habits change and behaviors change. And fundamentally, new technology isn't useful without that human to technology interface. So now that AI is out there and in everyone's hands, we had this explosion. Everyone is playing with ChatGPT, and organizations tried to adopt it. But in their haste, I think they sort of forgot that the first misconception is really that AI is not just a technology. It's really a business strategy. It's a new way of doing things, a new means of production. And so we have to think about it a little bit differently than just, okay, well, websites came along, we have to have a website. Social media came along, and now we have to have all of our social media accounts, because that's just scratching the surface of what this technology can really do. The second misconception, I'll kind of go through them and maybe we can dive deeper into them with some examples, is that AI adoption is mostly a technical exercise. And it's really not. Like I said, the human element is inextricable. And really, the organizations that are finding the most success have usually accidentally, but sometimes on purpose, unlocked this combination of what can the technology do to augment what people are doing today, but really building new ways of interaction and collaboration for tomorrow. And then the last thing is that many organizations have kind of gotten excited, like I said, with the hype of what AI can do today. So yes, large language models are amazing, and you can get some really neat efficiencies with personalized interaction through chatbots or generating summaries of meetings and things like that. But if we don't consider where the technology is headed and how workflows can change as it continues to get more features, and really what I would say is the biggest one is like this failure of imagination. What could the technology really look like 5, 10 years from now, and how will it change how we do business, how we operate in our daily lives? That I think is one of the bigger gaps. So those are some of the misconceptions that I'm seeing, and I would say maybe not misconceptions, but really missed opportunities to take the biggest advantage of this new seismic sea change that we have.
Yeah, those could definitely be missed opportunities. And what you just said really reflects my experience already. Yes, I recall the other examples, and it is interesting to think about artificial intelligence as being just one more of those things. Like we all started communicating via email 1,000 years ago. we we all got websites. Now we're all on social media and trying to figure out, which social media to be on, and where is your presence and what are you investing in. What's interesting, so to think, okay, now we have to use ChatGPT, or now we have to bring on AI as just another step in that. It's true, but there's more to it. And the reality is, I think this is a common misconception, but one of the things that has been illuminated is we've been using artificial intelligence all along the way. There have been pieces of what's evolved in everything that we've done with technology all along the way, because the machine has been working with us, and the software has been working with us, and software has been trying to be more and more intuitive. And for software packages that are used universally in education or in business, the more intuitive they are, the more user-friendly they are. So that means that there's some intelligence being built in there along the way. And then I could not agree more when you say there's the human element to it, because I think the biggest headline, the biggest exaggeration is the thought that the machines are going to take over and the machines are going to do everything. And we've already seen that if you just let go of the reins and let that happen, mistakes happen and can happen in a pretty big and pretty embarrassing way. But that there really is the human element. And for most organizations and most systems, it's going to be balancing the combination of the two.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Rebecca. And that's, when I think about like being like a practical futurist and saying like, okay, what's the end point? But then what are the steps we take from today to walk towards that in an incremental way? It's all about people. And I think what's really fascinating is, I love technology. Obviously, I've spent my entire career in it on the cutting edge, but it really comes back to how does it change and affect what we do every day? And that's where I see AI as really a foundational technology, right? We can think of it maybe like electricity, the internet. It's hard to find the exact parallel because we're just in the beginning of the book. But I kind of think of it like the transition of, steam power and industrialization, right? We first had steam power or water power. It was just, well, okay, we can turn this giant, using the power of a river, turn this wheel and we can grind some flour or something like that. And then, okay, well, with this turning mechanical tool, we can do a little bit more and maybe we can get some hammering and things done. So you get the steam engine. It's like, okay, well, now we can power trains and do all these things. But at the beginning of the technology, it's very easy to say, this is all it does, right? You got some hot water, you got some steam. What are you going to do with it? Even if you can swing a hammer or it can stamp something down, it's very simple. That's where we are with AI. What we can do today, one of the phrases I like is, today's version of AI is the worst version we're ever going to have, right? And so when we think about it in that context, you say, well, okay, well, we're just beginning to unlock this new means of production because never before has there been a tool that could take wide, swaths of data that's very complex and synthesize it in a way to produce a different result and output. That's something that's been the domain of just like not just human brains, but like really smart, very specialized human brains. And now we're taking some of those skill sets and making them more broadly available. So what does that mean for us as individuals and how do we deal with it? But just like all technological changes, it really is about people, right? And I think we've been sold this hype of, a future, and there have been plenty of dystopian movies, that we've seen, whether it's Matrix or Terminator or, any of the modern sort of B-level sci-fi movies that go straight to streaming, that talk about this dystopia. But I think the technology has more potential than that, and it really can achieve the positive potential if we get more people involved. More people being individuals at the basic level, if we all as individuals become more familiar with what AI can and can't do, where we should and shouldn't trust it, where we as organizations choose to use it and how we choose to use it to improve our insights, decision making, choose to improve experiences for our customers and stakeholders, and ultimately from a governance layer, right? How do we really understand and know where to regulate and where to create those guardrails from a policy perspective to ensure that this new means of production is going to benefit all levels of society and not just the agenda of a select few?
Mhm. Good point. Very, very good point around that. And we all get to be involved in that, as we do with everything, and engage in what that policy is going to look like, and advocate and work in partnership with the individuals that we elect that will set that policy. So a very good point there. So let's talk about, I think what would be very, helpful for listeners to this podcast who are looking at business and at the Workforce Development Board. As we say, we bring job seekers and businesses and employers together. And a lot of the way we close the gap between the two is education and training, and making sure that our local employers have a ready workforce. So of course, organizations and education is looking at how do we prepare people to work in AI. But I think what you have seen and experienced is there's the preparation and learning it, and then there are some other challenges that are faced along the way. So at Breakthrough Growth Partners, what are you seeing as some of the challenges that organizations are facing? And not just listing those common challenges, but for those challenges, what are without getting I think each challenge could probably take up its own session, but for those challenges, what are some of the things that an organization can do to address that?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's exciting about the technology is challenges are a good thing, right? I think a lot of times we're conditioned to say, oh, a challenge is a bad thing, you have to overcome it. Well, it is a bad thing, but a challenge also means you're probably doing or being forced to do something new and different. And you can't grow if you don't do something new and different. So that's where I think, that innovation and those challenges are a key part of growth. The first, and I would say most common challenge that organizations face is really just this lack of strategy. And when I say that, a lot of people think about, well, how are we going to use AI? And that's just one piece of it. But it's how are you going to use AI in a way that is relevant to your business and enhances your competitive strengths, and isn't just something you're bolting on just to say that you have it, but really isn't transformational, right? So
Right.
that's one piece of it. But then the other piece is even when organizations figure that piece out, you have to think about how is it going to look at scale? And so what does that mean? Let's say an organization is rolling out, and we've experienced this. I'm not going to name names for NDA reasons, but just speaking from experience, an organization wanted to roll out generative AI to all of its employees. Well, they got the tool, they licensed it, they did some of the internal work to create the privacy, security, risk guardrails that were needed, and then decided they wanted to roll it out to everyone. Well, it was crickets, right? They had a small percentage of their total employees who decided, yes, they want to do it. But what they missed is in order to get that adoption of any tool at scale, you have to have robust training programs. And even before the training, you have to have communication. You have to demystify the technology, invite people into it, because everyone has a whole host of experiences and perspectives with AI. You have some people who are ready to dive in. You have others who are afraid that it's going to take their job. You've got others who feel like it's cheating and sort of don't think that using AI is the right thing to do. You have others who don't trust it. And so bringing together these different human perspectives, creating a training and learning program for the specific initiative and tool you're doing, as well as for AI globally, is definitely one of the missed opportunities. So I think there's that strategy end to end, right? From start to scale, what are you doing and how are you doing it? The second piece then we see is really around, or gap, I should say, or challenge, is around data readiness and quality. And so, yes, while every organization has data, if you talk to the IT folks, they'll have been barking up this tree for years and saying, our data
Yeah.
isn't clean. And that may sound a little vague. So let me just be really specific, right? Like a lot of the information we generate in our businesses, we may have different Excel files and folders, but then you think about it at an organizational level, you have all of that data in large servers, right, and cloud-based servers and things like that. But just think about some really long Excel file that you have, right? Maybe it has some names or some dates and things like that. Are all of the dates in the same format? Are all of the names in the same format? Are the names in like separate columns? So it's first name, one column, last name, second column. Like those are little examples of ways that data can be confusing and not clear. And so now if you imagine that at scale, right, not just hundreds or thousands of rows, but hundreds of thousands of rows, millions of rows of data, getting those bits clean is very important because when you put that data into an AI system, that's what it's going to base off of. And so if you have errors in the input, right, you're going to have errors in the output. Garbage in, garbage out still applies no matter what
Yeah.
the magic black box is in the middle. And then the last piece, right, is this governance and ethical consideration. So even organizations that have governance in place and know what to do with their models, over time, as the model is put into implementation and it gets fed data and it probably is learning from the new outputs and the new information, you can have what's called drift. And so what that means is the model is going to change what it's making its decision criteria on, and it can reinforce different implicit or explicit biases in the data and ultimately not give you the result you want. So it's not enough to just think about governance as a snapshot, but really think about AI as a tool that's in production that needs that oversight and maintenance over a long period of time as it evolves. So I think those are some of the common challenges we see that we help organizations overcome in our work. What are you seeing out there, Rebecca, in terms of what maybe some of our smaller and medium-sized organizations are facing?
Well, what we're seeing is a lot of organizations that they either have it dialed in, they're starting to use it, and they're starting to face some of those challenges, or they're still seeking to understand how does this apply to me, and maybe not even understanding that they're already using some elements of AI in their work because there are things that are generated, there's algorithms in place, and they may not be able to connect that to this larger topic of AI to say, oh, I actually am using that, or that is helpful. I am using this software that has some elements of it in there. But organizations that we work with, if you're working with a highly technical organization doing advanced manufacturing, they've been looking at, how does this impact us all the way from the administration of the organization to design elements to actual production, distribution, things like that. So it's a much different topic than if you're looking at the hospitality industry, and then it's like, what part of the hospitality industry are you talking about? Is it something in marketing and appeal, driving customers, or is it in the services that we deliver? Is it in supply chain? So it kind of depends on what industry you're looking at, but it tends to fall into those two categories of working out the strategy and starting to encounter those challenges, all the way to the other end of how are we going to use AI, like how, and not realizing that it's already part of the tools that are going to be happening every day. In education, which is, we work with a lot of education partners. The big question, and a question I'll ask you, is what they're looking at. What do people need to learn? What do they need to know? They're also looking at how do tools like ChatGPT get used by students and in terms of learning, studying, writing papers, etc. And they're looking at, okay, what are the tools so that I can run this paper through and see if it was generated or if a person actually wrote it. There's that side of it. But really, a big question that we encounter and are looking at is what skills the workforce needs to be developing, because our education partners and training partners want to be teaching those skills. They want to introduce these concepts and skills because they know employers are going to be looking for them on the other end when the person completes the education program or graduates or goes to look for employment or to grow their employment. So that's a big question that we're faced with now, and I'd be curious what your perspective is on that.
Yeah, and I think answering that, let me touch on what you just mentioned about companies being different places, because that's 100% true, right? It's really surprising because many organizations, I say, AI is either you're doing it or it's being done to you. Because as you've said, even your vendors are just putting some AI tools into your software and everyone's branding it that way. And so thinking about your AI strategy, even if it's just we're going to use vendor tools with AI, but we're going to govern where our data goes, who uses it, and you send it to your vendor, but is their product essentially just sitting on top of one of these other large language models? So you don't really know where it's going unless you go down the rabbit hole a little bit. Is important for organizations to do, regardless of if they're dipping their toe in the water all the way to the advanced manufacturing. But what I would say is I think a lot of organizations, again, are very focused on the near term, right? So they've got okay, what can we use AI for today? And even in different sectors, there's really just like a few buckets that AI and data science machine learning is used for today. One is automation, right? So can we just do something in an automated way? The second is for insights. So can we do some sort of advanced analytics and come up with information for decision making? And then we're starting to get into with LLMs like AI for experiences, right? How can we shape the experience of our employees and customers? But I think in the medium term, what we're going to see is workflows changing. So not just, okay, we sprinkled some AI on top of it, but can we have someone go through an entire process that's end-to-end done by AI or a combination of AI agents? Where I get excited, and I think this is where when we think about education is, what's the future going to be 5, 10 years from now? So if I use like a really tactical example, right? Like agriculture has done taking pictures via plane or satellites of large fields and identifying spots where maybe it's drier or maybe there's weeds or things like that. Then in the medium term, you've got new tools and technologies that could help with like harvesting or maybe robotics to do like spot reduction of weeds through lasers, and we've heard cool things. But what I wonder is, are we sort of missing, and I'll set up my own pun, the forest for the trees. Like, what if we could use AI to generate, instead of large monocultures, a food forest? We could plant crops together that would regenerate the soil or that would repel certain pests that bite other plants, things like that. And instead of having one person do it and try to plant and experiment in different ways, it could just say, okay, for this acre, here's the things you should plant in this area, and that'll give you the maximum yield of a variety of different types of fruits and vegetables and regenerate the soil and do all those types of things. And so that's where I think it could completely change how we do farming. And I'm probably just still scratching the surface of it. So when I think about what we need to do to prepare for that future as individuals and as for our educators, it's really all of the things that make us more human. It's the true levels of creativity. It's the critical thinking, the problem solving, the what ifing. And that's where I think it's fascinating, because for anyone that's used ChatGPT, and I encourage everyone to use it for content creation in a subject that they know well. And you have to create the time for experimentation because you don't know what you're going to get. But I think a lot of people sort of use it and trust it. So it's like, I don't know, I'm not a travel agent, but I'll ask it to come up with an itinerary. But then I have no way of knowing if that's right or wrong. On the other hand, I oftentimes will use ChatGPT as a partner to brainstorm. And I'll say, I'm coming up with a conversation on this topic. Here's, some of the parameters I have. What do you suggest I cover? And what I find is it gives me a very sort of, I'll say maybe like a college level average answer of kind of the academic consensus of what everyone's talking about. But because I have domain knowledge, I'm going to say, well, that's not right. These are the specific areas that are actually important, and these are the things that are sort of generic sounding that look correct, but don't pass the 5-minute smell test. So for our students and for our educators, it's really about, how do we give students the chance to practice critical thinking and exploration? How can we let them play with AI in areas that they already have mastery to understand the limits of the tool, but then take it further and say, now let's use it to help us learn and get up to that, slightly above average college student level. But then past that point, really reinforce the need for them to build their own expertise through their own experience and creativity to guide what they use these tools for. I think those are the human skills that are going to survive the test of time, regardless of where the technology goes.
Yeah, really well put. And I think that is so beneficial because students are going to be curious and they're going to want to work with new technology. So inserting the critical thinking skills to say, don't just believe everything. The other thing I want to point out, just on a very basic level, is it's a form of research, because when you ask ChatGPT or whatever tool, AI tool, a question or ask it to generate some information, it's pulling from all the data that it can pull that is on the internet or in the cloud, like everything that is in the public domain, it's able to pull, and it's going to generate what, as you said, what's most common or most popular or most frequently cited. It's going to pull that together. So it really is another form of research. However, just like if you went and looked at 10 different websites, you've got to use your critical thinking skills. So, okay, when were these dated? When was this study done? Was there anything more recent? Does this one have a bias? Who was the author? What's their background? All of those things have to be taken into consideration as well. So this is just one more way of pulling in information. It's not, I think we tend to think of it as this magical thing, but it's really a tool to pull together information in a different way, and hopefully quickly and efficiently and as accurately as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm the dad of a toddler now, and it's been fascinating seeing AI and seeing, this baby grow into this very curious, interesting toddler. And I see a lot of parallels in that work because they are consuming vast amounts of information. They then want to engage with everything with a curiosity, but sometimes they have very unconventional outputs.
Yes.
Because they don't know yet. They don't have the judgment and the governance to know if this is right or wrong. They're just sort of approximating from what they see, perceive, and understand. At the same time, every day they're getting new skills and capabilities. And what I would say, if it boils down to one thing that I think every student, every person needs, it's really understanding incentives, right? Because if you peel back the layers, like let's take an LLM, it's essentially a statistical prediction of the next fragment of the word in a given context, right? With a certain amount of memory around it. So that's what it's really predicting and doing. But the algorithm has an incentive. As humans and as people who put content out, we have our own set of incentives, things that we want to achieve, things that we don't want to achieve. And I think that is one of those soft skills that will serve us all very well to understand, right? So when we look at a piece of content, whether it's generated from human or AI, what were the set of incentives of the system or of that person that caused them to put it out in that format and say those things and not some of the other things? I think that's really hard to do. It's like a high challenge and a high bar to clear. But I think what we need to do is to leverage that curiosity. So again, going back to my toddler, it's like sometimes they're going to go in the wrong direction, but encouraging the curiosity to help them figure out their own guardrails and building that knowledge from day one of you got to try what works, what doesn't work, and why did this person do this and why did this person do that, and think about it critically. That's something we all need the time and headspace to practice and the opportunity to do so. So that would be my one soapbox. If we could prepare for the future, it would be let's all better understand the incentives for ourselves and then the people and institutions around us.
Good point. Very good point. Well, I'm keeping our eye on the time here. We're going to wrap up soon. What you're just saying, though, does make me think, we have this question about how do we ensure equitable AI adoption across all levels of an organization? And I think part of what you just summarized is if individuals working in an organization have the ability to explore within safe parameters, but really just ask the question, okay, without pressure, without feeling like, oh, I should already know this, I need to be on top of this, but really have the safety in an organization to say, how does artificial intelligence cross paths with what I do? How do I encounter it? How might I encounter it in the future of my work? What do you see at Breakthrough?
Yeah, this is a big one. And organizations, it's very interesting seeing the perspective of executives and leaders who see this as a transformational technology that's going to unlock new productivity and innovation. But when you see what individual contributors in an organization find valuable, it's like to get through their routine and mundane tasks.
Yeah.
Which is a very interesting perspective. There's a lot to unpack there. But to your point, Rebecca, what I will say is it's really providing, first of all, that guardrails. It's surprising to me, at least, how many organizations don't even have basic policies for if you are going to use ChatGPT or another AI tool, do not put in personally identifiable information, do not put in people's names, do not put in certain company documents if you're using it in your work, right? So even if an organization isn't using it internally for a specific tool, individuals are. At the same time, what that tells you that individuals see it as a way to like make their routine work faster is they're going to rely on the technology and assume that it's going to work correctly, right? So their ability to take the time to experiment and learn is very limited from that individual contributor perspective. So when we're doing change management in organizations, one of the first things I do is talk to leadership and say, we're going to roll this tool out. But in order to do that, we need to reduce everyone's workload by like 1 hour per week. So they have that 1 hour to experiment and learn, right, with the training plan for what this technology can do for them. Because just like when we, converted over from handwriting notes to the typewriter or to writing emails or keyboarding, everyone's word per minute was very low. It took time to build up the proficiency to get back to the same speed as handwriting, and then obviously to exceed it. And so AI is the same way, where people need to become familiar with the tool, be comfortable with how it can empower them individually, and then have that time for experimentation in a safe space without the pressure of, well, I can't do this because I've already got, 60, 70 hours of stuff to do. And if I take this extra hour to just play around with a tool that may or may not produce something correctly, the risk versus reward just isn't worth it to change the habit and behavior. So I think that's like the key for leaders and organizations is to create this space for experimentation with the tools that you want to roll out and let people have the time to become proficient, just like they would. And a lot of times, we'll get some pushback where it's like, well, we want to have high performance in the near term, and like people should maybe learn on their own time or have different courses. But here's the challenge with the technology moving so quickly. You say, well, what happens if we spend all this time training them and it doesn't go anywhere? Well, what happens if you don't spend all the time training them and they stay there, but your competitors actually invest in their workforce? And now they're able to use this new means of production to unlock new workflows, new ways of doing things more competitively. So the fear isn't what happens if you, train them and lose the time in the short term. The fear, I think, should be what happens if you don't invest and you keep your workforce and what that means for your company in just a few years.
Right, right. And they still get the experience of learning something new, working in teams, how to use critical thinking. They're still learning anything, whether or not it gets fully implemented. That it's rare that no part of it gets implemented, but it's the skill of learning and learning in the workplace and applying and thinking critically. Those things will pertain to whatever is next in the organization. That's strengthening those muscles within your workforce. So I don't think that's time wasted at all. And as we've already seen, if you look at where AI already is incorporated into things, there's still plenty to learn, even if it doesn't become something that takes over the majority of your work in your organization. All right. Well, this has been a great conversation with you, Sean, and I think that we've been able to cover some things that are informative, perspective giving, and also touch on where we're going in terms of education and workforce development here in our local area. Doug, I'm going to turn it back over to you to wrap us up.
Well, what an interesting conversation and a necessary one. It's one of the things that I took away from this too is that AI is already here. It's not like a choice, that it's here. It's part of our lives. So I want to, Sean, just as we wrap up here, I just want to give you the final word about, any last words or thoughts about what leaders, what workers should think about when it comes to AI.
Yeah, Doug, absolutely. I would say for leaders and organizations, the number one thing is really invest in your AI strategy. Start with the assessment, right? Prescription without diagnosis is malpractice. And a lot of organizations have just jumped into implementation without really thinking how transformative this technology can be over the near term, but also the medium term and the long term. I think for individuals, it's that invest in yourself, right? Like there's these tools, they're free. Play around with them, set time to play with them in your spare time and see what they can and can't do and find the limitations. There's a lot of great resources online available for that. And I think last thing I'd say is, for policymakers, it's really important to build an understanding and engage with the private sector, but also thinking about and getting some expertise in how these tools are created. What are the inputs with the data and where the private sector is trying to take these technologies to ensure that it's serving all constituents, right? Because there is a need for governance, there is a need for at least oversight and guardrails and some questions to make sure that this is a new means of uplifting everyone in society, and that responsibility falls to all of us, but especially on the policy side. So yeah, I think AI is a wonderful tool. I think it's a great technology that we're just scratching the surface of, but that success and that future, state that we can create that uplifts everyone only happens if we're all engaged with it. So that's what I'll leave you with.
Well, Rebecca, always great to be with you. And Sean, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your words of wisdom with us. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Doug. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.